It's great to be here, and I hope you can see my presentation all right. So I want to I want to begin by moving some things on my screen that are blocking my view. All right. I want to begin by applauding the work that you do as educators. As a father of three, I recognize the profound influence that you have over the lives of our children. Whether you're a teacher, administrator, custodian, lunchroom supervisor, what you say and how you interact with students matters. You work tirelessly to provide a space that's safe and that's conducive to wellness as well as learning, and for that, I am deeply grateful. Um, I'm also aware that many of you are educators and you teach our children to use capital letters in titles. So on your behalf, I apologize for these small letters in mine. Um, For this presentation, I wanted to feel like I was taking a breath, like I was taking a pause from some of the pressures and the expectations that life puts on us. And these small letters somehow, for me, provide that feel. And for some reason, this doesn't want to advance for me. Give me just a second. I gotta move one more thing here. All right, there we go. So at MSU Extension, we like to show this slide because it's important to us that all of our programs be open to everyone. Everyone should have access to high quality science-based information. Now that means that we go the extra mile. Even if you are from Ann Arbor, you are welcome at our programs. Okay, so I'm going to read this kind of promo blurb that I sent for this presentation to kind of set the mood. So please indulge me as I read. Just moments in a garden can change our interactions with the world. A simple breath, drawing in the scent of rain, of earth, of flowers. A pause in the chaos of life. The sun on my face, the wind in my hair. In a moment, I must return to my work. But with this final breath, I draw in the garden air. I breathe in new life, and I bring a tiny piece of that with me as I step back through that door. I can face the chaos that awaits. I would like you to imagine yourself in this garden space. Forget about the emails that you might be tempted to multitask on. Just pause, breathe in the air. You are in that garden space. Let the world around you dissolve, the fears, the expectations. Right now, in this moment, it's just you and the garden. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? Touch the bark of that tree. Is it rough on your skin? Smell that flower. Is it sweet or does it make you sneeze? I'll give you just a minute to explore on your own, to look, to listen, to feel. And as you do so, I want to invite you to make a few comments in the chat on what you're experiencing in this garden, in this moment. What do you see? What do you feel? What do you hear? In that way, we can all share this individual moment together. Your break has ended. Now walk back down that path, back to your room, back to your laptop, back to this conference. But try to hold on to one thing from that garden. Hold on to the smell of the flower, or the feel of the bark, or the bubbling of the water. I love that description that someone put in the chat. When you begin to feel anxiety, pressure, just pause, breathe, and step back to that anchor, to that smell, that sound, that feel, just for a moment. So in this presentation, that's two of my kids, by the way. In this presentation, we'll talk about the science of gardening and wellness, some tips for personal wellness, and then ideas for bringing gardening into schools and where to go for resources. And I'm going to compile a list of some resources to send to Rhonda after this so that you'll have access to some of the things I might reference. So there's a large body of research that supports how our interactions with nature influence our health and wellness. Less is known about the actual role of gardening specifically, but there's a growing consensus that gardening provides many of those same benefits. We now know that gardening can improve our physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual well-being. There's my youngest son. He's 10 years old now, so he's not quite so small, but he was cuter when he was little. So I'll keep that picture. Um, Mental health is a very broad term. It encompasses many facets of emotional, psychological, and social wellness. It provides that inner core stability that allows us to respond to stressors and to adapt to change in healthy ways. Research has shown that interaction with garden spaces and with gardening practices can reduce our anxiety and depression. It can increase our awareness of our surroundings and our place in the world, and it can cultivate a sense of well-being and just overall happiness. Now, importantly, these effects, they're not just anecdotal. The physical activities of planting and weeding measurably reduce the stress levels and the increase endorphins, those neurotransmitters associated with stress reduction and pain management. Working the soil may trigger the release of serotonin, which serves as a natural antidepressant and regulates important functions like sleep, learning, and memory. And harvesting from your own garden can release dopamine, a powerful neurotransmitter that regulates our internal reward system. So it provides those feelings of pleasure that reinforce our behaviors. There are other health benefits that also derive from the physical activities of gardening. So this kind of low impact exercise is protective of cardiovascular health. It helps to strengthen joints, increase flexibility. The exposure to the sun increases our vitamin D levels, which supports the immune system, the health of our muscles and bones. And, gardening may improve access to nutrient-rich fresh fruits and vegetables, which are essential to healthy growth and development. So if you grow something yourself, there's a good chance that you might eat it. Now, in a school setting, gardening can foster community as well as strengthening bonds between students, teachers, and the community. It can also unleash creativity and help students learn to take responsibility. So, taking responsibility to nurture something that is actually living can have a very different feel to it than activities like taking out the trash or learning to clean up after oneself. Gardening can provide direct benefits to schools through enhancing social and emotional learning, as well as learning in content areas like science and nutrition. Might also be helpful in supporting the outcomes of some individualized education programs. Now, I'm super curious to hear from some of you. How have you used gardens or gardening to support health and wellness in a school setting? So if you have a story to share, if you could put it in the chat or just go ahead and unmute and kind of briefly share something that you've learned, something that you've been able to do in a school setting.
Sounds like they need your expertise. Oh, there you go.
I know someone wants to talk. These are educators.
Yeah, there you go.
So Michelle wrote, our high school dedicated an outdoor space and created a pollinator garden. Deborah wrote, we grow a veggie garden each year. Amy wrote, we have a greenhouse on campus and our STEM club plants native plants and has a sale to raise funds. Yeah, so there's a lot of things like that going on in the schools. Good, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. So let's talk about plants and gardens as anchors. So this is what we practice at the beginning. In your mind, you can anchor yourself to something in the garden, to something you can see, hear, or feel. And during periods of stress or anxiety, you can draw yourself back for just a moment. This is just one of many different ways that people have of kind of resetting what they're feeling inside. You can take a moment. So think now, take a moment to think about what your anchor was from earlier when we looked at this. Did you find an anchor, something that you could come back to? If you remember what it was, take a moment to write it in the chat so that we can all benefit. What was your anchor? What was it that you could see or hear or smell or taste that you were able to anchor to? The water sound, the beautiful purple flowers, a gentle breeze. Ooh, a gentle breeze. I love the thought of anchoring to a breeze. Oh, and there's another example of a special needs school, having someone retired person come in and plant and work with the students. It sounds like really fun. Ooh, fish swimming. I like that. All right. So, a lot of research focuses on how gardening can help calm emotions like anxiety. But plants and garden spaces can be focal points for exploring a rich array of emotions, a rich array of feelings and thoughts. It's not always about displacing an emotion like anxiety. It's sometimes about embracing the emotion. So I'm going to tell you a sad story. In 1998, my sister lost one of her two sons when he was very young. And as you can imagine, it was difficult for all of us, but especially for her. Trevor's favorite color was yellow. And in the midst of my sister's grief, the last flower to fade in the fall was a yellow autumn crocus. And the first flower to break the surface of the snow in the spring was a yellow spring crocus. She hadn't planted either of them, but they came up year after year. And with them, she said she could feel her son's presence, like he was right there with her. See, plants and garden spaces can help us grieve. They can help us remember. They can help us heal. They can serve as anchors for the soul, as a connecting point for memories. And anchor plants don't always magically appear in our yards like those crocuses seem to, but we might plant a shrub in memory of a loved one who passed. That very act of planting that shrub with our own hands can be healing. Caring for the plant is nurturing for us. It nurtures us as we nurture it. The small act can be helpful as we grieve, as we remember. At a school, you might have a class pet that dies. If school policy permits, students might want to bury the pet in a garden space and plant perennial flowers over the grave. It's an opportunity for a science lesson to explain that that pet continues to give even in death as its body rejoins the earth and provides nutrients for the plant. And planting and caring for the plant can be helpful as children grieve the loss of that pet. We do similar things with retirees, for example, planting a tree to honor someone who's a beloved retiree, especially if it's a flowering tree or a shrub that supplies food and habitat for pollinators early in the season. That makes it a good choice when the nectar and pollen sources are less abundant. So here's a few key questions I like to ask before taking on a new gardening project, particularly in a school setting. So what spaces do you already have access to where you find or you might find peace? Do you need a new space or do you need to change how you interact with the space that you have? What are the simplest changes you could make to that physical space that would make it more conducive to rest? And finally, how much more work will this add for you or someone else? So, as much as possible, we want to take advantage of existing spaces. So, think about how you can better utilize the spaces you already have. Can you provide better access for mental health breaks for staff and students? Maybe add a bench in a landscaped area so people can sit for a moment to refresh. What about mini lessons on soil science or flower development? Ideally, you're looking for a simple change that improves the use of the space without creating lots of extra work. Now, in some cases, you don't have an existing space and you might want to consider adding one to a small area or an underutilized space, maybe a little calming nook in the corner of a classroom where students can go when they need a break. But maybe you don't need to change the space at all. Maybe you need to change how you interact with it. There's a lot of recent research interest in mindfulness, which really originates from this broad idea that it's helpful to be aware of your own self and your interaction with the physical world. You might, for example, drive past hundreds of trees on your way to work and barely notice them at all. Yet when you take time to really see them, to look at them, it can change things inside you. For example, this time of year, before all the leaves are out, you can see if you look at the structure of trees, you can sometimes see bizarre curling shape to some of the branches. They're not just straight. Things that you would never notice once the leaves are out, and things that you would never notice if you don't stop and look. There's a wildness and a beauty to that, a tree that cannot easily be tamed. Let that energize you. Wonder at the mystery of how that shape arose from this tiny seed. See, sometimes all we need is to increase our own awareness. In a school setting, that might look like a short trip outside for a journaling exercise, encouraging students to explore and to be aware of the natural world. An easy classroom lesson is found right out in school lawns, which can be a classroom in themselves. So many of our common lawn weeds were intentionally introduced by European settlers because of their edible properties, their medicinal benefit. So dandelion flowers, they're edible. They were used for making tea and wine. The leaves were eaten as spring greens. The roots were used to treat heartburn and constipation. Even crabgrass was brought to America by settlers to use as forage for livestock. And clover, it's another European introduction. It was intentionally included in grass seed mixtures because of its ability to grab nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil where plants could use it. Can actually decrease the amount of fertilizer that your lawn needs. And there's a science lesson in the making. From there, you can talk about the history of medicine, how medicine was advanced by the contributions of Native Americans who shared their knowledge of herbal medicine with settlers who otherwise probably would not have survived, and think how that would have changed America. One example of that is purple coneflower echinacea, which we use to this day to treat colds and sore throats. Africans who were enslaved and brought to America, they likewise brought their knowledge of herbal medicine with them. They brought a few plants as well, and many of them served as healers. In fact, our first written compendium of medical knowledge was largely the product of Native American and African herbal knowledge. Though, as you would expect, neither group was given credit for their contributions. But there's a lot that you can teach and learn just in something as simple as the lawn. So many of you have underutilized spaces. Here's a greenhouse at one school that has not been used in a good while. Um, if you do have access to an existing greenhouse, consider using it. And if it hasn't been used in a while, it probably will need new plastic, which, can be expensive depending on the size. But there's just a lot of plants that can't be planted outside until school is almost out for the year. Now, I'm in Lansing, and in that area, the common suggestion we always make is to plant after Memorial Day. I just had a discussion with Jeff Andreessen, our state climatologist, a couple of days ago, and he said that with the changes in our climate in recent years, you can now plant 2 weeks earlier than that, which puts us at mid-May. Now, that doesn't help that much for schools. School is still close to out at that point, but if you have a protected space like this greenhouse, you can plant much earlier, even in late winter. You can also plant in the fall and harvest into the winter. And there's a fairly recently updated guide, a greenhouse manual, introductory guide for educators, and I will send a link to that information to Rhonda to get out to you for those of you who have a space like that you're interested in using. Now, as I like to say, my best advice is to keep it small and to avoid the temptation to go big. So unless you have a solid plan in place for ongoing maintenance, who's going to be watering, all of that, keep it small. Even in this big greenhouse space, you can still use just a couple of beds if you want. There's no need to fill the whole space with plants. You can take that pressure off of yourself and just use the space in a small way. And it's still a great space for hands-on workshops that can augment the curriculum or for after-school programs like a garden club. There's also plenty of partnership opportunities, sometimes with garden clubs or with MSU Extension Master Gardeners who might use it to grow plants for a plant sale to support the school and the community partner or for various other things. So the photo on the left is an example of something that's not a good idea for school gardens. Um, and the reason is it's beautiful, but who's going to take care of it? So there are two ongoing maintenance tasks that require the most attention in all of these garden events. First is watering. Now, for an in-ground ornamental garden, a lot of our native plants and rain garden plants would be good choices because they can tolerate wet conditions in the spring and they can tolerate dry conditions in the summer. That means you don't have to worry about watering them every day. Second task is weeding. So you may or may not know, but the difference between a beautiful looking garden and one completely overrun by weeds can be as little as 2 weeks in the right growing conditions. So you can disappear for 2 weeks and come back to something so overrun that it's difficult to regain control of it. Now, one simple solution for that is to put on a healthy layer of wood chips or some kind of other mulch. So if you'll be looking at, 4, maybe even 6 inches of mulch in order to really keep the weeds down. There's also some chemical options. I don't know if those are or not appropriate for a school garden. I don't know what's allowed and what's not. Many of you have probably used Preen, which is a granule product that you sprinkle on. So that uses a pre-emergent herbicide, trifluralin. So it may not be appropriate for schools, I don't know. But there's also the option of using corn gluten meal, which interferes with root development following the seed germination. So it functions as a pre-emergent herbicide with reduced risks. And Preen, among other companies, they also have products that use this. So again, I recommend starting small. You want to be realistic about what you cannot just build but maintain. So, okay, think for a moment, and I bet everyone on this call knows of at least one empty greenhouse. I don't know why that advanced on me. Knows of at least one empty greenhouse or hoop house or an overgrown garden plot at a school. So all of these were well intentioned, but all of them fell into disuse. So sometimes the visionary behind the project moves on to other things, but oftentimes the garden maintenance was just more than anticipated. So unless you have a grounds crew or a big grant that can pay for a garden manager, I would suggest you cut your initial dream garden down to something smaller. Students can be highly motivated at the start, but good luck getting them to return during the summer to water and weed. And again, 2 weeks can be the difference in weeds taking over that garden space. So much for your family vacation. A lot of plants like lettuce and basil, they're pretty much done for our purposes once they have flowered, and your commitment to these plants is measured in months rather than years. So these make good options for plants to use for schools. You can put them in little pots, and students can have ownership over the plants in that pot. For the next step up in difficulty, you can consider raised beds or planters. Now, these should be no more than 4 feet wide and sometimes smaller to allow students or staff to comfortably reach the center. The raised planters in particular can be set up to be worked from a wheelchair, making them good options for improving accessibility when needed. Either option gets rid of the need to till up the grass and to prep the soil for an in-ground garden. Um, and unless you get a potting mix that's full of weed seeds, which does happen, using raised beds or planters will greatly reduce the number of weeds that you have to battle. If you're in an urban setting, it also mitigates the risk of contaminated soils. If you do build a raised beds, avoid things like railroad ties, power poles, pressure treated wood. These are not good choices because the chemicals used to treat them can leach into the soil. Now, the newer pressure treated wood is different. The AC2, it uses copper, and the copper will move into the soil to a small degree, but it doesn't travel very far from the wood. If you avoid putting root crops close to it, then it should be fine for most purposes. Another thing with raised beds, you can consider intensive, sometimes called square foot gardening. And as you see in this picture, there's it's mapped out into a grid. These are 1 foot square grids. And these will allow you to not think about your space in rows, but to think about it kind of more holistically. So in each of those 1 foot square areas or spaces, you can put a certain number of plants depending on the size of those plants. And I'll include in the information I give to Rhonda, I'll include a link to some materials here. But for example, in a 12 by 12 space, you can put one tomato plant or a cabbage plant or cauliflower. Whereas something that's something like beets, carrots, onions, radishes, those can go in the 3 inch spacing where you have 16 different plants within that 1 square foot. So it's just a nice way to organize. It's good for kids because you can teach some math in there. And I don't know, I must have done something wrong with this. It keeps advancing. I probably rehearsed timings and left it active or something. So sorry about that. But it's great for kids. They can practice the math, practice the layout, and yeah, and putting in the plants. And there's lots of different things to do with these spaces. So finally, use space creatively. This is my wife in this photo. There are these are self-watering, which greatly reduces the maintenance demands, unless something goes wrong, which eventually something will go wrong. So you still have to keep an eye on things even when they're self-watering. But think about if you are in a like an urban space and you just don't have any place to put a garden, something on the wall is an option. Think twice about fruit trees. So fruit trees seem like a good choice since students can watch the fruit develop and even eat the fruit at the end. However, many of these trees have to be carefully paired with another pollinizer tree. Most will require pesticide sprays or bagging of individual fruits as they develop to prevent them from becoming wormy. Fruit takes a very long time to develop from flower to fruit, and the students who are excited by the flowers in the spring will have to wait until the following fall for the fruit. That's assuming that they're still at that school. And speaking of which, do you have enough apples for every student? Wildlife protection is another consideration. One of the reasons I suggest you start small, um, you may not have a good handle on the wildlife in the area and what they will do to your garden. So if you start small, then you don't lose as many plants when the neighborhood groundhog comes and takes one bite out of every tomato, or when the deer come and they browse the newly planted shrub that you put in. So there are things like fencing, physical barriers that will prevent deer. There are also certain types of plants that they less enjoy. So things that are fuzzy, things that are hairy, things that are prickly are things that deer are less likely to eat. If they really want food in the winter, then they will eat anything. Um, but in general, there's some tricks that we can do, and I can provide a little more additional information in the information I send around on that as well. So going back to protected environment, so if you don't have a greenhouse, but you have a little bit of a space, you could consider putting in some kind of a small hoop house. So this particular one, I had about $200 in materials into it. It's just half-inch EMT electrical conduit that I cut into stakes and drove into the ground every 2 feet. Then I took the 20-foot long, 3/4 inch PVC pipe and just stuck one end down onto a stake on one side and then bent it over and stuck the other end down on the stake on the other side. And that makes the ribs. Cover it with plastic, and you've got, a very easy and inexpensive kind of hoop house. The nice thing about it, this is tall enough for a person to stand inside, doesn't take up a whole lot of space, and you can get several weeks, possibly more than a month extra growing season time out of this. So in the schools, when you're gone by early June, this could be an option to be able to put in at least cool season vegetables earlier. So things like lettuces and beets could be planted quite early in the season in something like this. And it also makes a fun project for students. You have to plan out the materials that you need. You can build it, prep the space, all that kind of thing, and it's still very simple to do. All right, so a lot of people like to know when to plant outside. So the first thing, you need to know your frost-free dates. So I will send a publication that links to something on that, but you can also Google it pretty easily. Um, So frost-free dates are it's a little bit tricky. So it doesn't mean that you won't have frost after that. And you kind of have to look at the source of where you get it from. Typically, what we mean is that you have less than a 25% chance of having a frost after that date. So I think in our area, it's like May 17th in the Lansing area. So the next thing is don't plant in a wet soil. It can be moist, but you don't want it to be wet. And if you have like a meat thermometer or some kind of digital thermometer or some sort of thermometer, if you measure the actual soil temperature down about 2 inches, you're looking for an average temperature of greater than 50 degrees before you put in your leafy greens. So that's when you're planting like your lettuce and your beets and your peas and your carrots. Those can be planted directly outside, but wait until that soil is up to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And then for other crops, you want the soil to be above 60 degrees. So that's when you're putting in like tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and all of these other things that like the warmer temperatures. Another thing to note here, if you've grown plants inside, so like a tomato plant that you've grown inside or basil, and you want to move it outside into the garden. Now your soil's warm enough, but if you set that plant directly outside, there can be a large shock to it from going from, say, 70 degrees inside to maybe dropping into the 40s at night or the 50s at night. So you want to acclimate those plants. So before they go out, the first day I just set them out for maybe an hour or so in kind of a shaded spot. And then over several days, I gradually introduce them to more time outside, some time with the direct sun. You don't want to start them long times in the direct sun because they will get sunburn. So that really is a thing, and it will damage the leaves and destroy the photosynthetic apparatus and set them way back. All right, this jumped ahead for me again, so I must be taking too long. So some smart watering tips. So if you're using containers or you're using raised beds, those will dry out faster than in-ground beds. So you'll have to keep an eye on those and water them more frequently. You want to let the very top layer dry out, but if you're sticking your finger in down to the second knuckle, you should feel moisture down there. And if you don't, then it's time to water again. You want to water thoroughly, deeply, and less frequently for strong, deep roots. So the one exception to that is tomatoes. Well, I guess there's other exceptions like rice, but if you're growing tomatoes and you have water that's not consistent, then you will get something called blossom end rot. So if you've grown a tomato and you've seen the bottom of it turns black and then the rot spreads up the tomato, that's blossom end rot. So it's caused by a shortage of calcium, but it comes because of inconsistent watering. So if you keep the soil around tomatoes once they have fruit on them, keep that soil uniformly moist like a damp sponge, and that will prevent that blossom end rot. So another thing, we don't recommend watering the foliage of plants. If you do have to do like overhead watering or something where the leaves are getting wet, make sure you do it early in the day so that they have time to dry out. Otherwise, we get a lot of different fungal diseases. Okay. Um, Another thing, you will encounter problems that you don't anticipate. So here's the thing. Don't get frustrated. Well, at least not for too long. Okay, acknowledge the disappointment and then take a breath, step back to your anchor, and embrace the opportunity to learn. So we have a lot of different resources on our website, which is migarden.msu.edu. And there's lots of information on growing vegetables, on lawns, on pollinators, trees and shrubs, lots of things. There's also on that on that home page there's a phone number that you can call for our lawn and garden hotline to talk to someone. Now it's only currently staffed from 9 to noon on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. But we have a more accessible option, which is Ask an Expert or Ask Extension. So if you click on that, it brings up a page where you can upload photos and say, here's 3 photos. What happened to this plant, and how do I fix it? Any sorts of questions that MSU Extension might be able to help with, you can feel free to ask on there. I don't think there's any questions that have not been asked. And we can direct you to the right expert there. So if you have a lawn question, it'll go in and be routed to our turf grass experts. If you have a tree question, it might go to me because I'm a tree physiologist. And also you can also use this, like let's say that you wanna connect with someone from horticulture in your area to come in and do a soil health or gardening program at your school. Then you can click on the Ask an Expert and say, hey, we're in such and such an area. Is there someone who could come and do a presentation on this? Um, so the other thing I should mention, there are some mini grants available. So if you're a Title I school, then there are mini grants that are available, um, for I think up to $1,500 for certain types of like food type projects, like doing a little raised bed or something. So there are some options. And with that, I'm going to end the presentation and I will stop sharing. And I think we have a few minutes for questions.